my advertisement for Bain & Company here.
Thank you, sir.
When I worked at McKinsey, one of my colleagues, we were chit-chatting across the table, and he said, "Bankhead, I don't get you. You're a bundle of contradictions." He said, "I don't get that you are a Mormon, but your family goes to heavy metal concerts together. I don't get that you're the most logical person I've ever met, but you believe in God. I just don't get it." My story today is a story about a contradiction from my childhood that I feel like messed me up, and how I found help in unusual, unsuspected places to overcome that. It really starts with my family. I grew up in Provo, Utah. I've got 8 brothers and sisters, 2 parents. I guess I'll start just to get you should get to know my mom. When I think of my mom, I think about tasks and I think about efficiency. My mom used to tell me all the time that efficiency is our watchword. And she was efficient with the way she cleaned the house, which was very important. And I remember we had job charts, and one of my jobs one time was to clean the bathroom every day. And my mom would come and inspect my work. And I remember one day I hadn't cleaned the toilet because I couldn't find any rubber gloves. And she just looked at me and gave me a lecture about how I wasn't any better than her, and if she was able to clean a toilet with her bare hands, then so should I. And so she showed me how to clean a toilet with her bare hands. I remember she was efficient in her driving, and when I was in high school, before I could drive, if my mom was kind of shuttling us all home, all my friends home from something, my mom would always drop them off at the nearest major intersection instead of going all the way to the house. It was way more important to her to save a minute of her driving than to spare my friends 15 minutes of walking home in the snow. And my mom was really efficient with her money. She was one of the cheapest people I know. I remember when I was a kid, there was an advertisement in the newspaper, and the local supermarket was giving away a free bag of pasta. Limit 1 customer per coupon, you had to clip it. So my mom went through the garbage cans on the neighborhood and got 11 newspapers, and she clipped them out, and she gave each kid a coupon. We got in the family van, the 15-passenger van, we went to the supermarket, we all went through the So that's my mom. The other thing about my mom is my mom's very musical, and she believes a lot in education, and she was the first person who taught me about music. She sang to me lullabies and kids' songs as a kid. She taught me how to read, and I'll always be grateful for that. My dad, when I think of my dad, I think of hard work and responsibility. And my dad's from a family going generations back where you're expected to work and produce like a man from about age 5 on. And this was true with my dad. We were always expected to work hard and produce. And I got my first set of tools when I was 8 years old. And from then on, until I was probably 25, I worked 40 hours a week every summer and all day every Saturday working construction with my dad, which was actually a great experience for me. And when I was in 5th grade, I had some health issues, and my parents thought maybe I was allergic to something at school. And so while the rest of y'all were in junior high, I spent 2 years working construction with my dad. And some days would, operate heavy machinery. Other days he would just drop me off at the job site, and I would wire a house, and then he'd pick me up at the end of the day. Some days we would work together in the basement building cost accounting models in Lotus 123. That was a long time ago. The other thing I really learned from my dad is how to listen to music, especially classical music. And when I was a kid, our family would fall asleep, would all lay out on blankets on the living room floor, and my dad would put on Rachmaninoff or Tchaikovsky or Chopin, and we would fall asleep as a family listening to music. And one of the things that my parents both taught me was about our religion. I grew up in a very Orthodox Mormon home, and we did things like daily family prayer, daily family scripture study, going to church for 3 or 4 hours on Sunday, and we learned Mormon values and Mormon doctrine, which is essentially Christian values plus a lot of emphasis on family and family relationships that will last forever. So far, so good. I, in many ways, had a privileged upbringing. But there was a big contradiction in my childhood, and that was that my parents decided to beat their kids. And it was always done in anger. Usually discipline was the excuse, but it was not appropriate. And I remember in our family the way it worked, My mom was kind of the judge and the jury, and my dad was the executioner. So you're always in trouble for doing something that mom didn't like. And I won't dwell on the details too much, but I remember one experience when my dad was out of town. My mom's kind of big threat that she held over us if we didn't get our jobs done was that she would tell my dad that we were in trouble, and then that would be bad. And I remember one day I mouthed off to my mom, and she said, "That's it, I'm going to tell your dad you're in trouble." And I remember being so paralyzed with fear that I just went and sat on the couch and kind of just thought for an hour about whether I should commit suicide, whether it would be better to just kill myself now or have to face my dad in a couple days. That was the level of fear that I experienced. So that's not good. And like a lot of abused kids, I didn't really understand that this was not normal. I thought it was my fault. I didn't really get that this was something that not everybody had to go through. And I had a lot of classic consequences, like I didn't trust people. I didn't want to talk to adults or my peers. I found it hard to express my emotions or even to feel anything, and I felt very detached from the world. Fortunately, I had, ironically, learned from my parents about music and what a powerful tool that can be. And so for me, music became the first important thing in my life that helped me deal with and overcome this contradiction from my childhood. My favorite two songs in the world are Rachmaninoff's Third Piano Concerto and a song by Metallica called Unforgiven. And if you're, those are from the two opposite ends of the spectrum. But one of the things that my brothers and I have long argued is that classical music and heavy metal have a lot in common, just different, just 100 years apart. And if you're familiar with either of those of my favorite songs, you'll recognize the emotions that they convey. Depression, anger, hatred, fear, resignation, sadness. They're not happy songs. But for 4 or 5 years, I fell asleep every night listening to Rachmaninoff's Third Piano Concerto, and I got to where I couldn't sleep without it. It's an hour long, and I would turn it on at full blast and fall asleep, and that helped me, I guess, feel better. And as I became a teenager, I got more into heavy metal. My brothers thought that was cool. I thought that was cool. And I remember the day I bought my first Metallica album. I went to the store, and I bought it at a used shop. It was the Metallica Black album. And I brought it home, and I put it in my little cupboard with a padlock and a chain around it, where I kept all the things that I didn't want my parents to know that I had, or that I didn't want my brothers to steal. And throughout high school, I was really into this music, and I had all the Metallica albums, and I comforted myself and listened to songs with inspirational titles like Fade to Black, To Live Is to Die, Sanitarium, Enter Sandman, Battery, and stuff like that. But for me, this was a really important part of my life because I didn't really know what was going on inside me. Could never have articulated what I was feeling. I didn't even know that I had feelings, and maybe I didn't. And it's even hard now for me to describe how these things that my parents did made me feel. The contradiction between the good experiences and the bad that I had with them. The contradiction between going to church and then being beat by your parents who are supposed to be loving and kind and protect you. And so I want to tell you, I'm just going to recite the lyrics to Unforgiven just to give you an idea, not only of something that helped me explain what I was going through, but also helped me feel better. New blood joins this earth, and quickly he's subdued. Through constant pain, disgrace, the young boy learns their rules. With time, the child draws in, this whipping boy done wrong. Deprived of all his thoughts, the young man struggles on and on. He's doomed. A vow unto his own, that never from this day his will they'll take away. They dedicate their lives to running all of his. He tries to please them all, this bitter man he is. Throughout his life, the same. He's battled constantly. This fight he cannot win. A tired man they see, no longer cares. The old man then prepares to die, regretfully. The old man here is me. What I felt, what I've known, never shine through in what I've shown. never be, never see, won't see what might have been. What I've felt, what I've known, never shined through in what I've shown. Never free, never me, so I dubbed thee unforgiven. I have dozens of memories of teenage Paul laying on the bed, crying, blasting this song on my stereo. Not really knowing what was going on, but recognizing that whoever made that music had experienced something that I had experienced and knew how I felt. And later, as I got to know about Metallica's history and read up on them, I found out they were right. They had a very similar childhood to mine. So Metallica and similar music was a big deal for me and helped me cope with and have a more normal growing up teenage years than I would have otherwise. The next big thing that changed my life and helped me get the tools I needed to overcome my childhood was my mission for the Mormon Church. By way of background, when you're a Mormon, if you're a man, you pretty much everybody goes on a mission when you're 19, 20 years old. You get on a plane, you go to another state or another country, and you're there for 2 years. Now, I didn't go on a mission because I believed in Mormonism. I just went because that's what you do in my culture. There were maybe 5 non-Mormons in my high school. All my friends went, all my brothers went, all my uncles had gone, my dad had gone. It's just kind of what you did. And the best way to think about a Mormon mission is that it's equal parts freshman year in college, military boot camp, and touchy-feely. It's kind of weird if you haven't done it, but if you just think of a third, those things, you pretty much got it. And I remember as I was in the missionary training center, you get 2 weeks of formal training before they ship you off. I realized on day 2 of my mission that it wasn't going to work. It wasn't going to work for me to just go throw away 2 years of my life, paying my own way, working 14-hour days, 6.5 days a week, with no vacation, no holidays, no Metallica, and no friends, no calls home. That was too much of a cost to pay just because that was the thing to do. And I realized that I needed to know if the message I was sharing about God and about His plan for us was something that I really believed in. And as I was practicing teaching my first lesson, I had this little book, this little cheat sheet, and on page 5 it says, you're supposed to tell the investigator how you came to know that God was there, how you came to know that the things Mormonism teaches are reality. And I was stuck because I didn't know that God was there. I didn't know that Mormonism was true, so I just skipped that page. And I'll deal with that later, but it kind of bothered me. And a lot of the other missionaries seemed to have their act together, and I didn't. But on page 6, which was the last page of the first lesson, it said, teach the investigators how they can find out for themselves if God is there, and find out for themselves if these things you've been teaching them about God are really true. Tell them to pray and ask God, and they'll have an experience where God will convince them that you told them the truth. I thought, shoot, it works for the investigators, maybe it'll work for me. So I decided that night I was going to try this out, and I decided to see if God would step it up and convince me that this was true. So I prayed, I knelt down, and I prayed for maybe 10 minutes. And I told God that I was willing to be a missionary. I was willing to live this ridiculous lifestyle and live all these ridiculous rules. And I would do my best, but that I needed Him to show me that this was more than, a whim, that He was really there. And I wanted to know that I was supposed to be a missionary, that I was supposed to go to England, and I wanted to know that the things that my parents had taught me hypocritically and not lived were true. Finished my prayer, nothing happened, so I went to bed. As I was lying in bed, the other guys were kind of still doing their thing. I had an incredible experience that's really hard for me to describe. But as I laid there in bed, I had this powerful physical feeling that was kind of warm, a little tingly, that just came over my whole body from my head to my toes. It was something I'd never felt before. And at the same time, I had a clarity of thought and a peace of mind that I'd never experienced. And as I sat there feeling this feeling, wondering if I was still in my body or not, I realized that God was answering my prayer. And it lasted for about 10 minutes. And I thought, holy cow, I guess I'm staying on my mission. And I was a little surprised. I was a little taken aback by how convincing that experience was. So I went to sleep. The next day I woke up, wrote down what had happened in my journal, and they shipped me off to England. It's a good thing that I was that convinced, because being a missionary was really, really hard for me. I already didn't like talking to people, certainly not talking to strangers, and that's pretty much what you do as a missionary the whole time. I remember about a month into my mission, I was in the city of York, England, and I was knocking doors, and my trainer was with me, and we knocked on this door, and he looked over and said, "Your door, Elder Bankhead." And just at that moment, I realized I was praying and asking God to please let nobody be home, because I didn't want to. And I realized that maybe that was a bit of a contradiction in purpose. But I stuck to it. I was really committed, and I'm happy to say after about 18 months, I finally got to where I actually kind of liked talking to people and liked doing what missionaries do. And I also learned a lot of really valuable experiences on my mission that were kind of not necessarily central to the purpose of being a missionary, but were central to my purpose of overcoming these things from my childhood. First off, I learned how to talk to people. That was a plus. And I learned how to express my feelings. I learned how to get British grown men to cry by asking them to talk about their feelings and about their families and about their beliefs and about their trials and about their successes. And that was the first time I'd really ever had conversations on any level with anybody. More importantly, on my mission, I got the first inklings that maybe something was wrong with me, that maybe I wasn't normal. I remember all of the other missionaries, when they came out, were homesick for about a month. They missed their girlfriend or their mom or their dad or their dog or their Corvette or whatever. And after seeing this over a couple of times, I was like, what is it with these people? I was never homesick. I never missed my mom or my dad. I never wanted to call home. I wrote home every week because I had to. And I thought, maybe I'm not normal. I remember noticing that other missionaries developed this kind of relationship with people they taught. I realize now that it was kind of a loving, trusting relationship. And I remember in this old abandoned mining town south of Doncaster, England, I visited this family with a guy named Elder Euler. And allegedly I was there to kind of train him and kind of polish up his missionary skills. And we walked in and we started teaching this family. And I noticed that Elder Euler's skills were okay. He wasn't super articulate. He didn't do everything perfect. But I noticed that everything he said, these people they listened to and they believed. And I could tell that they loved this missionary. They treated him like an angel. And I could tell that he cared about these people more than anything else, and he just wanted them to be happy. And I realized that whatever was going on between him and this family, I'd never experienced before. Not as a missionary, certainly not with my parents. And so I thought, once again, maybe I'm not normal. Now in a mission, you have about 200 college-age kids, and you have one adult supervisor who's called your mission president. Maybe the equivalent of the captain of a ship, I don't know. But he basically has total control over your life. And you hope you get a good one. And I had a good mission president. His name was President Siemens. And he would interview me for about an hour a month just to see how I was going and to give me advice. And I remember him saying things like, not all missionaries are like you, Elder Bankhead. You need to be more patient with Elder so-and-so for being homesick. You need to realize that not everybody is 100% all the time. Sometimes people have challenges or emotional things they're dealing with, or their grandma may have died. And I remember him giving me little lessons about how to relate to people and how to understand that normal human beings have feelings. And I just really didn't have them. Later on in my mission, as I worked in the office, and I was around President Siemens a lot more. I got to go to his house. And I remember watching him interact with his wife. And I noticed that they liked each other, which was a real shock to me. My parents never got along. They were always fighting. There was very little love in my family. And that they They got along, they liked to talk, they liked to laugh, they liked to joke. And when their kids would come to visit, it was the same way with their kids. Parents liked the kids liked the parents. And I was really, really surprised by this. I had no idea that a family situation could be that happy or that positive. And so I filed that one away. And finally, when I was a missionary, I had one other important experience. I was reading my scriptures in a place called Mansfield, which I did every morning at 7 o'clock. And those of you who are Jews or Christians, I was reading Isaiah. And for me, Isaiah is kind of like the D&D textbook. It's hard to understand. You know you got to read it because it's there. But it's not my favorite. I find it pretty tough. But I was plowing through it, flipping the pages. I read this chapter, and as I turned the page, I realized I was having one of these powerful spiritual feelings again, which happened again, now and again on my mission. But this was a really strong feeling that God was telling me something about this chapter, and I didn't know what he was telling me. So I reread it. Still didn't make sense, but the feeling was so strong, and the thought in my mind was so clear that God was talking to me and that this was important for me. So actually, I've never done this before. I wrote down, like, this chapter is true, it's for me. And I even drew some boxes and whatnot around stuff that I thought God thought was important. And I moved on. So when I came home for my mission, once you're done with your mission in Mormon culture, the next thing on the agenda is to get married. So, you get right to it. And BYU, where I went to school, is full of Mormons all trying to get married. It's a crazy culture. I started dating this girl named Lisa, and we actually went on a road trip out to San Francisco. We visited my uncle, and he gave us his big black car, and we went for a drive up in the wine country and looked at the sunset and all that. And I remember we were talking, parked by the side of the road, and I remember as we were talking, I felt this feeling again. Not again, I felt this feeling. And it was something I'd never felt before in my life, but I recognized immediately what it was, that it was love. And it kind of took me aback. I've made fun of a lot of guys for dropping the L-bomb on girls. I said, Lisa, I love you. And she looked at me like I had 3 heads because she knew that I would never say something like that. I wasn't one of these guys. But I felt for the first time love, and that, as I dated Lisa for a while, I got to experience love for the first time. The first time I really loved another human being. Didn't mean our relationship was perfect. There was a lot of ups and downs, and I couldn't really trust her, and she didn't really trust me. But it was a start, and as I dated Lisa for a while, I realized that I definitely was not normal, and I definitely had some issues. So I decided to get some help, and I made an appointment with a local psychologist whose name was Dr. Siemens. And it turned out it was my mission president who had now come home from his mission and taken up his day job. That turned out to be really good because I don't think I could have trusted anyone else. It's a little bit of a stigma to admit that you need to go see a shrink. But I remember my first appointment, dark room, drapes are closed, mahogany-lined walls, 37 volumes of the American Association of Psychiatry in the bookcase. I'm sitting on a couch. There's this old guy with gray hair in a mangy chair looking at me. And he opens his mouth and he says, "So, Paul, tell me how you feel about your mother." And I thought, oh, I can't believe this. This is so typical. I heard this is what psychologists did, but I didn't. I thought he'd be better than that. But I answered him and I said, "Dr. Siemens, I don't feel anything about my mother." And he said, "Okay." And that was pretty much all I said. And for the next hour, he, I didn't realize this, but had been researching my case for 2 years. And he explained to me what was wrong with me. He explained that because of my childhood, I had, you're supposed to trust your mom and you're supposed to trust your dad. They're the first relationship that you have. And because my parents treated me poorly and betrayed that trust, I retreated behind what he called 6-inch thick concrete walls around my heart. And I compartmentalized people, every person in my life, safely far away where they couldn't hurt me and they couldn't make any connection with me because I didn't want to take the risk of being hurt. And he told me that unless I combined all of my faith in Jesus Christ and all of the psychological stuff he was going to do to me, and I worked really hard at it, I was never going to be able to have a normal relationship. And I was never going to be able to really be married, certainly not love anyone like you should love your wife. And he gave me an assignment to write down every horrible thing I could remember from my childhood as my first week's homework. And that weekend we were actually going on a family trip. My mom would run away the week before and finally come back, and we could cancel the police reports. And I was driving up, and my dad was driving the truck, and I was sitting back here on my laptop. And my dad did this to me, and it was really, really tough. I had suppressed all these memories, and it was really tough. And as I was working through this and feeling all this pain that I had forgotten about, I looked over and I saw the scriptures, and I thought, I'll take a break. And I immediately remembered this experience that I had on my mission with this chapter, and I immediately realized that this chapter was for this trial, this problem, and that 2 years before I realized I had a problem, God had given me the answer. And this time when I read it, it made sense. Fear not, for thou shalt not be ashamed, neither be thou confounded, for thou shalt not be put to shame. For thou shalt forget the shame of thy youth, and shalt not remember the reproach of thy youth. For a small moment have I forsaken thee, but with great mercies will I gather thee. In a little wrath I hid my face from thee for a moment, but with everlasting kindness will I have mercy on thee, saith the Lord thy Redeemer. For the mountains shall depart, and the hills be removed, but my kindness shall not depart from thee, neither shall the covenant of my peace be removed, saith the Lord that hath mercy on thee. And then I saw this orange box. And all thy children shall be taught of the Lord, and great shall be the peace of thy children. In righteousness shalt thou be established. Thou shalt be far from oppression. For thou shalt not fear, and from terror, for it shall not come near me. I can't explain what a big deal this was for me to feel like I had a promise from God that somehow I would get better, and that somehow I would feel peace, and that most importantly, my kids weren't going to have to go through what I went through. They would have a childhood of peace, and that helped give me the confidence to even have kids in the first place, the confidence that not all of my siblings have as a result of our childhood. So that was the start, and over the next 6 months, went through lots of assignments, did lots of therapy, and I felt like I made a lot of progress, and I got a lot better at opening myself up, having feelings, crying, things that you might take for granted, but I paid a lot of money. Dr. Siemens did not give me a discount. I knew that I had a big breakthrough when my mom walked down into my room about 6 months later, and she handed me a check for $600. 6 months before that, I'd gotten so fed up with dealing with my mom and her endless litany of tasks and harassment about needing to mop the floor every day that I cut her a deal. I said, Mom, I'll write you a check for $100 a month, and you leave me alone. And she said that was a great deal for her. She got money. It was a great deal for me. I got left alone. And she came down in my room and she said, Paul, here's your rent money back. You shouldn't have to pay me money to be your mother, and I should have the kind of relationship with you that you want to have with me, and I'm just glad you're my son, and I'm glad that you're living here. And I thought, who are you, and what have you done with my mom? But turned out my mom had been in therapy too. And I remember when I left that summer to go on my internship that I actually cried when I said goodbye to my mom. Again, something that may be normal for you that I pay good money for. So, things with Lisa and I didn't work out. We never could trust each other. She could never accept all this baggage with my family, the worst of which I haven't shared. And my sister's laughing. So we broke up, and when you've been dating someone for 2 years, you have no friends, you have no contacts, you're kind of starting over. We've all been there. So it was so painful for me to deal with this. I just didn't want to see Lisa anymore, and in Mormonism, it's kind of like school districts in the sense that you don't choose where to go to church. You tell the church where you live, and they tell you where to go to church. So if you want to go to a new church, you got to move. So I moved. And I got away from Lisa. I moved in with my brothers on the other side of town, and I showed up at church the next Sunday, and I felt terrible. I walked into church, I sat down, and I had the most terrible feeling like, you do not belong here, Paul. This is not where you're supposed to be. And I thought, how can you say this, God? I'm at church. Where do you want me to be? But I felt so out of place and so terrible that I walked out and left after 20 minutes. And I said, gosh, guess I'm moving back. So I undid my move, went back, canceled my contract, and went back to the old church where Lisa was. And a week later, I met my wife. And I remember one of the first times Amy and I hung out was at her house, and we were making gumball strings for a tree, or a Christmas tree. And she looked up and said, hey, Paul, tell me how you feel about your mother. And I thought, you have no idea. So I said, you know, my mom and I have had some tough times, but she's made a lot of changes. I've made a lot of changes, and I love my mom. And I'm grateful for all that she's done for me. And that was the truth. And one of the most annoying things about going to BYU is that everybody's trying to get married, and it's really stressful, and everyone's in a hurry because you've got a deadline. You graduate unmarried, it's kind of like... And what's really annoying is that you have these people, they're all married, and maybe you guys have experienced this. Married people think that the only qualifications to get married is you're single, she's single. Or they'll say things like, you'll just know. You'll just know when it's right. I always knew it was right. And you want to slap these people. Because you're in these up and down relationships, and it doesn't feel right, and you're wondering, maybe I just need to, and it's really stressful. But I'll be darned if after I had been dating Amy for 2 weeks, we both didn't know that we were going to get married. It was just a matter of, time and details. And the reason people would ask us, what do you love about Amy? And I remember having a hard time articulating it. Usually I would say, well, she's just really low maintenance. That's not the most flattering way to describe it. But what it meant then was I was used to this kind of relationship, and with Amy I had this kind of relationship. What it meant is that this is the first person I'd ever met who I could trust completely, who I felt like wouldn't stomp on my heart if I gave it to her, who I felt like knew me very well and knew all the stuff about me and my family and didn't blink. She just accepted it. And she was really willing to love me for who I was, to let me love her, and it just worked. And for the first time in my life, I had the ability, I felt comfortable trusting another person with my heart. And we've been married now for almost 5 years, and it just is better and better, because the longer we're together, the more trust we have, and the more we get to know each other. It's funny because instead of talking to myself in my head now, I just talk out loud, even when Amy's there, and she sometimes wonders what I'm talking about, but I'm just talking to myself. But it's because I trust her so much that there's no filter between me and Amy. That's how good our relationship is, and how much I've been able to integrate her into my heart. So it's awesome, and I love Amy very much. And now that I have kids, it's even better. Kids can't hurt you. It's easy to love kids, at least until they're teenagers, when they can't hurt you. But every day I walk up and I walk into Sadie's room and she's just smiling and she's just so happy to see me and she gives me a big hug. And my kids love me and I love my kids. It's amazing to me how much I love them and how easy it is for me to develop a relationship with them. And so I feel like that's the happy ending to my story. I feel like it's been a rough road getting here, but now I feel kind of like, congratulations, Paul, I have feelings. And I have love in my life, and I have the kind of family that's different than the family that I grew up in the sense that I feel like we love each other and we treat each other well. And I can guarantee for my kids something that I never had. And so I feel like it's great to be here, and that's my story.
Sort of the things that went down in your house cause you and your siblings to be closer? And what do those sort of relationships, what did they look like then and sort of how did they pan out now that you're adulted?
I don't know anyone who has a closer relationship with their siblings than my family. We call it the sibling support network, and it's a direct result of being united against the common enemy. And things like, as soon as my older siblings kind of came of age, they did a lot to protect us, and they, my second oldest brother came home from his mission and actually talked my dad out of beating his kids, and he stopped. And, when my mom would ground us or take away the car, my siblings would always give us theirs or let us sleep at their house if we got kicked out and that sort of thing. So today, the first people that I call when I'm in trouble would be my siblings. Very close. Anna?
You talked a lot about how you repaired some of your relationship with your mom, and I was wondering, sort of, your dad. How do you feel about your dad?
My dad's complicated. I'm actually probably my dad's favorite son. We always got along well, and one of the weird things about my childhood is I had a lot of great relationships with my dad. I literally spent every day with him for 2 years when I was supposed to be in junior high. And by the time I was in high school, he'd kind of stopped being mean to me. And so we had a pretty good relationship. Unfortunately, in the last few years, we've discovered that my dad is actually Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and he has a whole separate life that we didn't know about. And so it's cost him his marriage, his church membership, his trust with his kids. So I'm kind of starting over at ground zero with my dad because of this whole separate thing that I didn't tell you about yet. And I don't really know what to do because I can't trust anything he says. And so I'm kind of starting off. He's a great grandfather for my children. I visit him a couple times a year, and I'm hoping that over time we can make it work.
What relationship do you want your kids to have with your parents?
As much and as much as possible. I love my parents are great grandparents. Ironically, my dad is a great grandfather. I would leave my kids at his house, no problem. And same with my mom. My mom doesn't really want to hang out with our kids so much because she's so worn out from having 10 of her own kids and 10 grandchildren. But she's great. She'll come and visit us when we have a baby, take care of them. And both of my parents have, I don't know, between 5 and 10 years ago, recognized that they were abusive, that was wrong, and they've both apologized and tried their best to change. So those issues are kind of dealt with as far as grandchildren are concerned. Yeah.
Yeah, do you ever find yourself maybe unconsciously about to say or do something that your parents might have done to you, to your kids?
Yeah. My default reaction anytime my kids disobey me is to slap them. And I've had to work really, really hard. I've never done it and I never will. But I'm absolutely shocked how ingrained that is somehow in my DNA and also in my environment. It's you know, for that reason I've sworn off all physical discipline, because I know that if I just don't even want to go there. It's really tough. Yeah.
Very thoughtful about sort of how your parents shaped your life. And you spent a great job thinking about your parents. Like, do you have a view on like what caused them to develop into the parents that they were?
Yeah, it was their parents. My dad inherited abusing his kids from his dad, who got it from his dad, who got it from his dad. And my mom has an exceptionally task-oriented, obsessive-compulsive mom. And so she got that from her mom, and she got severe depression from her dad. And you know, so they were both messed up too. So, aren't we all? Yeah, in the back.
What role is music playing in your life these days?
It's a good question. There was a big break for me. Music was like everything when I was in high school. And by the time I got home from my mission, I didn't listen to music for 2 years as a missionary. So that kind of, I think, I kind of kicked the habit of needing it as kind of a crutch. But it's still a big deal. I still have like 3 stereos in the house. The piano was the first purchase I made when I got married. It's still a big deal, but it's not like, I don't sit in the chair and just listen to music for 3 hours anymore like I used to. No, sorry, I didn't know if that was a hand.
I have one.
Yeah.
What role did the community around your family play? Or was this just completely unknown to anyone around you?
That's one of the crazy things about it. Nobody had any idea. As far as everyone else knew, especially, you know, in Provo, Utah, the community is a church community. And everyone thought our family was like amazing, so impressive, and we all got good grades, and we all were musical. They had no clue what was going on at our house. Even my cousins and my aunts and uncles now, who are just starting to find out about this, are shocked. You never know. Meredith.
Do you have a vision of like how many kids you want and what you want your family to look like?
Less than 9 kids. One of the things I've discovered actually since I've been married is you don't have to have a predetermined number of kids. They come one at a time, maybe 2. So I would say we'll have more than the 2 we have, less than 9. I say, I don't know. I'd say 7 is my absolute max. So we'll see. I'm sure we'll definitely have another. They're lots of fun. In the back?
How much of this do you plan to share with your kids?
Say again?
How much of this story do you plan to share with your kids?
That's a really good question. I haven't nailed it down entirely, but I plan on, at a minimum, well, I think they'll just find out because my family's very open and honest about this stuff. We like to talk about ourselves when we, you know, and how messed up we are. It's, you know, conversations like, well, what did your therapist say? Oh, mine said this. But if they haven't figured out, certainly when my kids get married or before they have kids, I'm going to sit them down and say, just so you know, you're genetically predisposed to some nasty behaviors, and you should be aware of it. So, yeah.
Would you send your kids on a mission?
Yes. I would never want to do it again because it was so hard, but I'm glad I did it and I learned a lot on it. Yeah. Yeah, go ahead, Edward, and then Aaron.
Yeah, did you ever have a hard time reconciling your religious beliefs with these terrible experiences that you had?
Huge problem. It's totally hypocritical, totally inconsistent. And in Mormonism, like the fundamental concept of God is as your loving Father in heaven. And if you have a mean father on earth, really hard to believe in a loving Father in heaven. Aaron?
What was kind of the impetus for your siblings and your parents and everybody to kind of start talking about this and kind of work through this?
You know, it all started, my brother John, who's the next oldest for me, he pretty much, when missions play a big part in this, when he was a missionary, he was so messed up from what had happened to him in his childhood. He didn't have the advantage of being the most favorite son, he was the least favorite son. And he spent pretty much his entire mission just in therapy, just trying to decide if he ever was going to come back home again. And so when he came home, we thought he was really weird because he was saying, you guys, we've got issues, we need help, we're not normal. I remember him telling me, Paul, you don't have feelings and you need to like figure this out. And I was like, you're weird. But that kind of, so he started it, and then, you know, my mom had lots of nervous breakdowns, and eventually, about the time I came home from my mission, when I was in therapy, 10 out of 11 of us were also in therapy, so we got there eventually. Yeah.
Where are you in the birth order?
I'm number 6.
So did you ever feel protective over your younger sibling?
By the time I was old enough to be able to do anything about it, it had stopped, for the most part. Yeah.
How important do you think forgiveness is? And do you ever think that if you, instead of being so forgiving of your parents, had just cut them off, walked away, do you think you would be less impacted?
That's a good question. I don't know what the view from the science of psychology is. I can tell you that for me, forgiving my parents was fundamental to being able to achieve healing, and that's certainly the teaching in the Mormon version of Christianity. You're expected to, and I think all Christianity, you've got to forgive people who've done bad things to you if you want to be forgiven. And also, I believe that there's a lot of help that's available from God to help you be healed from things that happened to you that weren't your fault. But a prerequisite to accessing that help is forgiveness. And maybe that's just a psychological construction, I don't know. But most people I know have to forgive first before they can move on. Certainly me. Yeah, Michael.
So maybe you could speak a little more about how you see your relationship with God having evolved over your mission or grown during your mission and what it is today?
My dad and kind of his side of the family are very intellectual Mormons. Probably because they have no feelings for beating their kids. But I was taught as a child that God was very strict. And God didn't love people who didn't obey him. And that God was kind of this accountant who punished you if you were bad and didn't do anything to you if you were good. And it turns out that view is totally not what the Mormon Church teaches. That's just what my grandfather and my dad thought. So as I started reading and studying the scriptures myself as a missionary, and I started to hear like what all my mission companions thought about God, and I started to have my own experiences with prayer, I discovered a God who was very loving, forgiving, who thinks it's really important for people to do what they want to do, whether that includes, you know, having a relationship with him or not. And so now I kind of see God as someone who loves me, who's there when I need him, who does expect me to live a certain way. And probably a big priority in my life is trying to develop my connection with God so that I can continue to have those feelings and those thoughts that I believe come from him and feel like we're kind of on the same page. Because when I've been there and been on the same page and I followed those feelings, it's worked out for me. Yeah.
Do you ever find yourself like repeating old patterns of sort of retreating into yourself a bit? And if you do, what do you do to cope with that?
Maybe you should ask my wife this question, but I'll try. I'm definitely not normal. I think it's really common for me to take kind of a binary approach to relationships or negotiations or situations. I either think it's really good or I think it's terrible. I'm either gonna it's kind of a go big or go home kind of strategy. And I find myself, the other thing I have to watch out for is that, like deep down inside, I really don't care what other people think about me, and I should. And I have to kind of work on that, thinking about how is this going to affect, the person that I'm dealing with. That's really hard for me to still to internalize. I'd say that's probably my biggest thing I watch out for. Joel?
I was curious if Metallica and some of the heavier stuff they listened to as a kid still resonates with you, or whether other things resonate with you now that you've developed in different ways.
Mostly my music is kind of frozen in what it was in high school, to be honest. I still listen to Metallica a lot. And Interestingly, since I mean, all this analysis and the way I've told my story is definitely from like a hindsight view. At the time, I had no idea that I was broken. I had no idea why I liked it. And so now it's actually interesting. I actually had to work hard to memorize those lyrics to my favorite song, because when I was in high school, I never listened to the lyrics. I had no idea what they were. It was just the music that was really powerful. So now actually I find myself doing more analysis and be like, oh, this is what the band was going through. This is what the lyrics say. No wonder this made sense to me. So I kind of appreciate it a little bit more.
I guess the follow-up, have you thought about what kind of music you want to introduce your kids to?
Everything that I like. I put James through Def Leppard's greatest hits when he was 2 weeks old.
Yeah, I don't really have a point with this, but I just have to say how impressed I am that you actually managed to convince your parents that you were allergic to school and to skip all of middle school. Man, I tried that a long time.
The funny thing about that is I was super sick. I had these migraines, and didn't even occur to me, like, we went to all these doctors and allergists and tried all these hokey cures, and it didn't occur to me until like age 20. I was like, oh, my parents were beating me. No wonder I was sick and stressed out. So in retrospect, it's like all of my siblings had these weird health problems. Like my brother would he'd like rub poison ivy on his face every day to avoid school, and my other brother had these weird seizures that we turned out later were fake, and like lots of weird stuff happened in the family. I wish I had time for more stories. Yeah.
You mentioned any friends growing up or anything like that? Did they play a role? Did you kind of escape to their houses for, sleepovers or whatever?
The truth is, I didn't have a lot of friends growing up. I played a lot with my cousin who lived next door to me, and I had a double whammy when I was in high school. Everyone else was in junior high. I was working construction, so I lost all those friends. And then I skipped a grade. So I was in high school a year too young. I was a little tiny kid, and it took me almost to the end of my senior year before I had really anyone to hang out with. So that's a separate possible cause for my social problem. In the back?
You mentioned spiritual experiences that were physical and comparable. Have you continued to have those, or what's that been like?
Yeah. So in Mormon theology, we believe that God communicates with us through the Holy Ghost, and it's the Holy Ghost that delivers these experiences. And people describe it different ways. I know one guy who was in a heavy metal band called the New York Dolls in the 70s and then converted to Mormonism later, said it was like being on LSD without the LSD. For me, it's kind of there's a range of experiences. Sometimes maybe I'm going to church, I just kind of feel good, or I feel peaceful. There's been maybe 5 or 6 kinds of experiences, a couple of which I've shared today, when it's been like, whoa, I gotta sit down, this is a big deal. That's not common, and in Mormonism, actually, you don't talk about these kind of big experiences very often. They're usually pretty private, and they don't happen that often. But like I said, I do strive to try to be in connection and live my life in a way so that if God has something else to say, I can hear it. Okay.